the Democrats going with this? If Mondami is the face of the Democrats on the East Coast and Katie Porter is the face on the West Coast, I don't know if that's great politically for that party. Democratic socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up in the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal, tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like that poor in the Oval Office last week.
The political winds inside the Democratic Party seem to be shifting, and according to Bill Maher, that shift could come with serious consequences. The outspoken comedian is sounding the alarm, warning that leaning too far into socialist ideology could backfire in a big way. His message is simple but sharp. Push the party too far left and you might push voters away, possibly costing Democrats the 2028 election. Maher's take is blunt, fiery, and hard to ignore. If you enjoy fearless political commentary and straight-talk analysis, make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for this deep dive into the debate shaking up American politics.
The party has a clear choice here, very clear. One wing is saying don't ever use the word socialist again, and one is saying,
I am a democratic socialist.
Clear, huh? So how do we decide who's right? Well, it turns out we don't really have to flip a coin. We have the evidence. In 2024, 13 Democrats won. In districts, Trump also won. All moderates. This isn't rocket science. All the left-leaning think tanks have done autopsies on 2024, and they all came up with the same message: move to the center. Even the New York Times, which did so much to promote woke politics, now says the partisans are wrong. Moving to the center is the way to win. And Democrats should recognize the party moved too far left on social issues after Obama left office.
When Bill Maher speaks, subtlety usually isn't part of the package. His warning to Democrats is crystal clear. Continue drifting towards socialism, and you could end up handing Republicans a political gift. According to Maher, embracing labels and policies that many Americans still view as controversial might energize conservative voters, rally the Republican base, and strengthen their hold on national power. Instead of expanding their voter coalition, Maher believes Democrats risk shrinking it, giving their opponents a simple but powerful campaign narrative. His advice? Shift back toward the center. Maher argues that the Democratic National Committee should focus less on ideological litmus tests and more on practical issues that resonate with everyday voters, things like the economy, affordability, and opportunity. Winning elections, he says, isn't about impressing the loudest voices online. It's about appealing to a broad spectrum of Americans. If Democrats want a real shot in 2028, Maher believes moderation, not ideological intensity, may be their strongest strategy.
I know the kids think that stuff that happened before their appearance on the planet didn't really happen, but it did. We've run this experiment many times, and the results are always obvious. Here's capitalist South Korea at night from space. Here's socialist North Korea. Yeah. In 1990, Venezuela was wealthier than Poland. But then Poland, finally free of Soviet-style economics, went all in on capitalism. And now their economy is as big as Japan. And people there have high wages, low inflation, cars, vacations, homes. Meanwhile, Venezuela traded capitalism for Hugo Chavez's Socialism for the 21st Century, which turned out to be like socialism in the last century, or any century, a fucking mess.
Maher also believes socialism faces a steep uphill battle in the United States. In his view, many Americans remain deeply skeptical of the concept. He argues that voters don't necessarily need academic lectures about ideology. They simply look at global examples and draw their own conclusions. From stories of economic slowdowns to concerns about government overreach, Maher says socialism often carries negative associations for American voters. Whether those comparisons are always fair is up for debate, but he insists the perception alone holds enormous political power. In politics, perception can be everything. Maher believes that policies perceived as giving too much control to government institutions make many voters uneasy. After generations raised on ideas of free markets and personal opportunity, Americans tend to be cautious about sweeping ideological change. That cultural instinct, he argues, means openly embracing socialism could push swing voters away, and in a tight national election, even a small shift could determine who wins the White House.
It turned one of Latin America's richest countries into one of its poorest. Low wages, high inflation, shortages, outages, 8 million people fleeing. If you think New York can somehow reinvent this wheel, you're in for a rude awakening. Zoran can't make your wishes come true. You're thinking of Zoltar.
Maher points to developments in New York City as a glimpse into what might happen on a larger stage. Some Democratic candidates there have openly embraced democratic socialist labels, including rising political figure Zoran Mamdani. For Maher, this isn't just a local political storyline, it's a potential preview of where the party could be heading. While the approach may energize activist circles, he worries it could make moderate voters uncomfortable, especially those who tend to decide national elections. History, Maher argues, suggests that candidates strongly tied to ideological branding sometimes struggle to maintain broad public confidence over time. Mamdani's long-term influence on New York politics remains to be seen, but Maher predicts that governing success, not campaign slogans, will ultimately determine how voters judge the experiment.
Democratic socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up in the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal, tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like that poor in the Oval Office last week. Bernie, AOC, Mamdani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're democratic socialists, and that's a very different thing, and I don't think people know that yet.
Maher believes this is where a common misunderstanding enters the conversation. Many people assume the label democratic socialist represents a completely different philosophy from traditional socialism. Critics like Maher argue the distinction may be more about presentation than substance. From his perspective, adding the word democratic doesn't necessarily change the core ideas behind the policies, such as a larger government role in the economy or expanded redistribution programs. Supporters of democratic socialism, of course, strongly disagree. They argue the label reflects a commitment to implementing policies through democratic institutions rather than authoritarian systems. Still, Maher believes voters eventually judge outcomes rather than branding. In politics, labels can shape first impressions, but long-term public opinion often comes down to results. If policies resemble systems Americans already distrust, he warns, a new label may not protect politicians from voter backlash.
I don't think people realize we already have a lot of socialism. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, food stamps, veterans benefits, Pell Grants, COVID-era payments, farm subsidies, disability payments, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, corporate bailouts, and the jobs program that is building weapons the Pentagon doesn't even want. All that is socialism, much of it appropriate to soften the edges of capitalism, but the DSA are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy. Their platform, for example, calls for completely open borders. They're for what Biden was doing, but more. You think you're going to win an election on that?
Maher also identifies immigration as another area where Democrats face political vulnerability. He notes that during the presidency of Joe Biden, many voters cited border security concerns as a reason for losing confidence in Democratic leadership. For those voters, the issue wasn't abstract policy theory. It was a question of competence and order. When people feel the system isn't functioning properly, Maher says, they often start looking for alternatives, even if they don't fully agree with those alternatives on every issue. What concerns Maher is the idea that some politicians may continue promoting policies that voters believe have already been rejected. In a closely divided country, he argues, repeating unpopular strategies while expecting different results could prove politically risky.
Either defund the police or military in the streets. Either MAGA's crypto crony capitalism or city-run grocery stores. No, I don't want that. I want a Democrat who reassures me if you like your Whole Foods, you can keep your Whole Foods. Governor-elect Svanberger once said about Biden's presidency that, quote, nobody elected him to be FDR. They elected him to be normal. Normal. You know, at this year's DSA convention, or as it's commonly known, Comic-Con, get this, you had to submit a photo of a negative COVID test to get in 2025. Yeah, no one wants to do that.
Maher's overall advice to Democrats can be summed up in 2 words: be normal. In his view, the party doesn't need dramatic ideological revolutions to win future elections. What it needs is a steady, practical approach that connects with everyday life. Maher has frequently criticized what he sees as extreme forms of woke rhetoric, arguing that it can alienate more voters than it motivates. Most Americans, he says, aren't looking for ideological purity tests or viral social media debates. They want stability, competence, and leaders focused on real-world concerns: jobs, inflation, safety, and opportunity. When political messaging feels detached from ordinary life, Maher warns that voters either tune out or turn away entirely. For him, moderation isn't weakness, it's smart political strategy.
Seems to me that there are 2 pillars that this country is founded on. One is democracy, and one is capitalism, free markets. And it seems like one party wants to get rid of one, and the other party wants to get rid of the other, right? The Republicans are not that, democracy is just not number 1 on their list. It just isn't. It isn't. It's behind Christianity and a few other things. And the Democrats, I mean, I read these, 74% are for democratic socialism. Only 16% favor capitalism. Is this going to be a country that I don't recognize in 5 to 10 years if we don't have these 2 pillars?
Another point that surprised Maher is polling, suggesting that a noticeable share of Democrats are open to embracing socialism. To him, that level of support carries significant political risk. The word socialism, he argues, still carries heavy historical baggage in American politics. Many voters associate it with struggling economies or declining living standards in certain parts of the world. Even if those comparisons aren't always accurate, Maher believes the perception alone could shape election outcomes. Campaigns often revolve around simple narratives, and Republicans would likely seize on the label as a powerful attack line. Maher isn't claiming every progressive policy leads to economic collapse, but he insists that labels matter. Lean too heavily into an ideology many voters distrust, and opponents may gain an easy political advantage.
Where are the Democrats going with this? If Mondami is the face of the Democrats on the East Coast and Katie Porter is the face on the West Coast, I don't know if that's great politically for that party.
Maher's skepticism also extends to the rise of progressive political figures such as Zohran Mamdani and Katie Porter. Some critics argue that their growing prominence signals a deeper ideological shift inside the Democratic Party. The concern, according to those critics, is that emphasizing democratic socialist ideas could alienate moderates and independents, the very voters often needed to win national elections. The debate isn't just about individual politicians, it's about the broader identity and direction of the party. When voters sense a movement away from pragmatic governance toward ideological positioning, confidence can start to fade.
Whether those fears prove accurate remains uncertain, but the conversation highlights a growing internal debate within the party about electability and long-term strategy.
These democratic socialists at another of their conventions, they were told to make jazz hands instead of clapping, lest some delegates suffer sensory overload. And also, and I'm not joking, they were told not to be wearing, any aggressive scents.
Please don't go into that space with anything that's like an aggressive scent, for instance, right? Because that's going to be difficult for people.
Oh, for f***'s sake.
In the end, Bill Maher doesn't hold back. He argues that the Democratic Party's growing focus on what he calls woke politics could become an electoral problem if it overshadows everyday concerns. When leaders appear more focused on cultural debates and symbolic language battles than on real-world problems, Maher believes many voters feel disconnected. Over time, that frustration can quietly build. What worries him most is the combination of economic and cultural messaging. Pairing openly socialist rhetoric with aggressive cultural progressivism, he argues, can create an image of political extremism, fair or not. And elections, Maher reminds people, are often decided in the middle. Drift too far from what voters see as mainstream, and a party risks shrinking its appeal. His final warning is clear. If Democrats want to remain competitive in 2028 and beyond, they may need to reconnect with the political center and with the everyday concerns of ordinary Americans. And that wraps up today's video. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more bold political analysis and commentary.